It's time now for the Business Report with Joel Crosskill.
Lots to share with you in the Business Report today, emerging from the inaugural press conference of the Independent Fiscal Commission, which commenced operations on January 1, 2025. Former Minister of Finance Dr. Nigel Clarke, before demitting office, described the entity as the guardian and interpreter of Jamaica's fiscal rules, required to provide independent assessments of budgetary outcomes in addition to independent fiscal analysis. The IFC, along with the Fiscal Research Centre and the Independent Central Bank, now form critical components of the country's institutional economic framework. The significance of that development was acknowledged by Jamaica's first Fiscal Commissioner, Courtney Williams, during his maiden address, during which he declared the 2025-26 budget currently being debated in Parliament as credible based on macroeconomic and fiscal projections.
It is good that for over a decade, we have grown accustomed to greater macroeconomic stability. But this was not always the case. In Jamaica, that a national budget was credible, or that we were on a sustainable path. In fact, for most of our history, this has not been the case. We can recall up to a decade and a half ago, about 3/4 of the budget was dedicated to servicing the debt. About almost 75% of the budget dedicated to serving the debt. When you add on top of that compensation as well as pension, you got into 90%. So for the budget, over 90%, it was less than 10% to do everything else that the government needed to do. And that is why Jamaica is now engaged in a comprehensive process of economic reform and related institutional strengthening.
Though Commissioner Williams acknowledged that fiscal commissions typically don't make recommendations on policy, he also made clear the fiscal principles behind the Commission's proposals, which included a number of recommendations for the short and medium term relating to perceived budgetary shortcomings, such as a comprehensive fiscal profile for specified public sector bodies, the tabling of revenue measures concurrently with all other budgetary documents, establishing clear compensation negotiation cycles, and the shifting of deadlines for the annual filing of income tax returns are intended to raise the level of public awareness and discourse around the issues impacting perceived budgetary efficiency.
It's the role and the mandate of the Commission to bring the matter so that the public is more informed. I believe that a more informed public will be able to also bring that, and for want of a better word, pressure to the government as well to say, these are needed changes if we really want to sustain this fiscal program and this fiscal profile.
Another early potential point of attention for public consideration contained in the IFC's first Economic and Fiscal Assessment Report speaks to the fiscal rules relating to a ceiling on public sector wages as a percentage of GDP, a convention the government has shown reluctance to maintain amidst the ongoing public sector compensation reforms.
So there was a fiscal rule for wages at 9% of GDP that was abolished about 3 years ago. We're not necessarily saying that the government should reintroduce it at 9% of GDP. It could be at a different figure. And the government could so determine what year it intends to meet that target. We think the government can actually leverage and should seek to leverage the macro stability that obtained now to seek to actually get the unions to agreement to that kind of ceiling on the wages.
While some suggest the sky's the limit for Jamaica's potential growth trajectory if it remains faithful to the fiscal principles afforded by the reform process, the Commissioner also made clear the intent to clear the pathway of understanding for the Jamaican public of what the principal driver of the country's economic growth should be and why.
One consequence we may be aware of fiscal imbalance in the past was the fiscal dominance of the economy. And so our private sector perhaps got too used to, too accustomed to government leading the way in economic matters. That ought and can no longer be the case. It is greater private sector earnings that must generate the tax revenue to fund continued improvements in fiscal policy and to increase public spending in areas of public safety, public order, infrastructure, and human capital development. Yes, we must maintain our focus on fiscal and monetary policy and appreciate the gains while committing to the work that remains in both areas. But we must also remember that in an export-oriented economy, the main job of both the fiscal and monetary authorities is to lay a stable foundation for the private sector to function and to prosper, because it is the private sector, not the government, that needs to drive the economy. It is time for the private sector to take the baton and take us home. Some of us may recall.
And that was your business report. I'm Joel Crossgill.